I'm going to do an example of a pond, but then also do a maintenance or an access road to the bottom of the pond, so I can explain how to deal with site management and grading groups and how feature lines react together, just to review that. And then at the end, we'll go ahead and go through some of the plotting features between CTB versus STB. Okay. So the reason why I put this little picture up here is so that's kind of the way I'm going to design the pond, where you get some side slopes, etc., with the elevation of 23 here. I'm going to do a very simple pond since we don't have a whole lot of time. But to give you an idea here, I'm going to minimize that and come back into the project we've kind of been using throughout these classes. But this is the pond I'm talking about. So what I've done so far to start is this is just an X reference with the outline of the pond defined here. And in the prospector, I have an existing ground surface to draw from. Okay. So a lot of the times what I do like to do, especially in grading, is set up two viewports. I feel that's pretty important. So I'm going to do two horizontal here. And the reason for that is so I can do 2D and 3D at the same time. And I'll explain why I find that so important in a little bit. But you'll see here this X reference is just flat. It's all just 2D. So the way that I typically want to start grading is there's two steps that you must do before you start grading at all, because our goal here is to create a finished grade surface, and that surface is where we're going to calculate volumes from. In order to do that, for grading side, you need what's called a grading group. And so there's two steps what we're going to start with. So step one over here in the prospector, there's sites. We have to create a site, and then we have to create a grading group. Those are the two steps. So I'm going to right-click on sites and go to new. And I'm going to call this one pond site. And you'll see underneath that site, this is where grading groups lies. You must create a grading group if you're going to do any daylight. If you're just drawing feature lines or 3D polylines, a site is required for a feature line, but 3D polylines you're not. So a grading group is the only way at this point in time to do daylighting. So you have to have that. So I'm going to create a grading group, and I'm going to call it pond. So you see I have a pond site and then the pond. I make sure you name those different names, because otherwise it'll get confusing in a little bit. And this is an optional choice here for automatic surface creation. Remember, our goal here is to create a finished surface, and that finished surface is where we're going to calculate the volumes from. So this is, I'm going to show you an example where you might want to use automatic surface creation. There's other times when you might not want to. So we'll do one with and one without. I will say that the volume-based surface is going to be EG, so it automatically knows, and we'll compare the two. Since I had automatic surface creation, it does that as well, so I'll hit OK. All right. So what kind of happens with this structure here, I have the site, there's my grading group, and it also creates the surface. Now what happens is if I add anything to the grading group, it automatically places it into the pond surface so that it'll link together. Okay, that's a very nice way to go. If it works, great. It's awesome. But since grading is probably one of the most unstable parts of the program, meaning tends to crash every so often, especially in 3D, sometimes it doesn't work very well when it's a large surface, or some types of geometry don't work very well, just the way that it is. So you're going to have to play that by ear about if you want to do automatic surface creation or not. Okay, but we're going to show you how to do automatic surface creation. Next thing I need to do is I need to make this a feature line, which is part of the X reference, so I'll have to bring that in here. And for memory, we're going to make the top of that pond elevation 23. Okay. So in the Home tab, I'm going to go to the feature line to create the feature line from the object, which is that pond. It's part of the X reference, so I'll use the X reference option and pick it. And so you'll see here, using feature lines are required to be placed inside of a site. That's another reason for the site as well. I'm going to give this a name. And layer is fine. That's no big deal. So I'll hit OK. So if you notice here, I now have a feature line, which is just basically the polyline at flat elevation. But you'll notice over here in the prospector, there's a little bullet next to feature lines that I call pond outline. What's nice about that is I can go through here, and if I need to rename it, or if I have a lot of feature lines, it's easier for me to find. I can right-click on it and select it so I can go to task on it. Okay. All right, I'm going to move this up to elevation 23. So when I click on a feature line, of course, with Civil 3D, the ribbon, and there's these two buttons here, Edit Geometry and Edit Elevations. If I click on Edit Geometry, it just opens up a panel. If I hit Edit Elevations, it just opens up another panel. Okay, so whether I'm doing elevation changing, there's a whole slew of commands, or same thing with geometry, if I'm inserting a PI, joining, breaking, that kind of thing. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do the raise lower command. Click on that. It's going to ask me to specify an elevation difference or an elevation. I'm going to go to an elevation of 23. So the whole thing is 23. And hopefully you see in 3D that it's now set that way. Okay. Now the reason why I want to show you this in 3D is I really need to explain how feature lines react together if they're in the same site. So let me give you an example here. I'm going to draw a polyline through here, and I'm going to turn this into a feature line. I'm going to show you what happens. So I click on that guy. Feature lines creates feature lines from objects. I'm going to call it junk, and hit OK. Look what happened in 3D. Okay. The reason why I want to make sure this is understood is if you have feature lines in the exact same site, and they cross or they touch, they will react together, depending on which one was edited last. Like, for example, if I take this one, I physically move it. Notice now that the feature line that I drew through now pulls up to it. So if I undo that, move this, etc. All right, so you really need to understand that if you have feature lines touching or crossing and they are in the same site, they will react together. Okay? A way around that, if you do not want that to happen, your really only solution to that is either make this not a feature line. I can explode it to a 3D polyline, or place it in a different site. So there are times in here when I'll come and create a new site, and I usually call it dummy, so there's really nothing in it. And if I move this to that site, these two feature lines won't react. So if I click on that, right-click, there's a move to site. I know it's up here somewhere, but there's this move to site. I think it's here. Yeah, move to site. And I'll say I'll move it. Oh, of course, it got placed over here. So I'm going to move this to the dummy site, and notice in 3D they no longer react together. Okay? So as long as you understand that's what's happening, you can probably take advantage of that sometimes with not having to worry about what the elevations are, as long as you know which one was edited last. So that's a big part of feature lines you need to understand, is the reaction if they're in the same site. Okay. All right. So back to this. So the first thing I'm going to show you here, back to here, we're going to go down at 4 feet at a 2-to-1 slope, 20-foot width, 1 foot down, a little bench kind of thing, and then 3-to-1 at a 5-foot depth. Now I could do this many ways, but I'm going to show you the grading object way. And you can decide on which way you guys want to do it. So in the Grading Creation Tools command, which brings up a toolbar, and these are the different criteria that I can use to grade the distance, elevation, relative elevation, or surface. Now, the grade to relative elevation in our case would probably be more appropriate because I want it to be 4 feet below than 23. So if I typed in 19, that would work as well, but then if I move the elevation of 23 to something else, this one would remain at 19. So you kind of got to think about how you want these things to react together. So I think relative elevation would work well. So I'm going to create grading. Pick this guy. You see here, select the inside or outside. I'm going to go to the inside. Apply the entire length. I'll explain that later, but for us, it's going to be yes. Relative elevation is a minus 4 feet. And you want a grade or a slope. We want a slope. And forgot, 2-to-1. Okay? Return for 2-to-1. So you'll see here, I'll hit escape to get out. You'll notice here, because of the fact that I did check the box that said automatic surface creation, you see the contours come in and the surface is automatically there as well. So that's the thing is, if you're not seeing it in 3D, a lot of times I would, instead of make it minus 4, I might put in 4, which would go the wrong direction. So I can immediately see that in 3D. That's why I like to have the 2D and 3D realm here. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do this 20-foot bench, like 20 feet over, 1 foot down. It's like a 20-to-1 slope. Okay. So this time I'm going to do the grade the distance because I know the bench is going to be 20 feet wide. All right. So create grading on that. Pick this to the inside, or actually say yes. Notice this one, it didn't tell me which side to go to because this is a continuation of that grading object. Okay. Specify distance of 20, and I could do a grade or a slope. The grade would be 5%, or the slope would be 20 to 1. So I'll do a slope, but I'm going to say minus 20. Okay. Hit return, escape, and so you'll see here it's actually creating that structure. So what's happening here is these guys are just grading. These guys, the whole thing here, this is called a grading object. The grading object is made up of three things, basically. The grading object itself, the feature line that it comes from, and it creates a feature line at its base. So these things can actually be used in a surface, etc., okay, which we'll talk about later. All right, so the last thing we're going to do here is 3 to 1 at 5 feet. Okay. So relative elevation. Oops. Create grading, pick this, entire length yes, minus 5 feet at a slope of 3 to 1. Okay. So hopefully you can kind of see the structure building as I go. And that's why I really like to show the 3D at the same time. I can really get my instant feedback, see if I did it right. Okay. Now notice here that since these three things, these three grading objects, these things are now linked together, which means if I change one, they all link together and I can change it. For example, instead of a 20-foot bench, let's say I change that to a 10-foot bench, but I still want it to have the 20 to 1 slope, let's say. Okay. So instead of a create grading, you'll see that there is also an edit grading. So when I go to the edit grading, notice it highlights over which one I want to deal with. So I want the bench, which is this one here. Okay. The distance instead of 20, I'm going to make 10. And still a slope of minus 20. That's going to stay the same. Okay. I don't know if you saw it. It did jump. You see the contours aren't following it yet because I have to hit escape out of the command so it actually finishes. And so you'll see it follows. So with the grading objects linked together, if I edit one, they're all linked together. They all change. If you use a feature line and use the function where you can actually do a 3D offset, they're not linked together, so you have to edit each one in turn. So sometimes it's going to be very beneficial to you to be able to edit that. Okay. The other thing that you might notice, I'm going to come in here. I'm actually going to shade it here. You'll notice there's a big hole that's not part of the surface. Okay. If you're using the grading object method, you can actually, if you want this to be flat, obviously we can also design it. We'll do that here in a minute. But there is also an option to create what's called an infill. If you have a grading object that creates a closed area, which we do, there is a function in here. There is a create infill, which will just create a straight plane across the bottom of that pond. So if I hit create infill, you'll notice here it finds it. I don't know if you can see that on the screen, but it's highlighting it. Once I find the area I want, I click on it, and you'll see now it actually creates a surface in there. Okay. So infill, pretty easy. Otherwise, you have to place some kind of data in there. Okay. All right. For example, if I want to do this as well, I want to use a combination of grading objects as well as a feature line. So what I'm going to do is put like some kind of a low flow condition in here. And I'm just going to draw something funny here. I guess not funny, but some kind of a condition here. So I want to have some kind of a low flow and then maybe a low point here. But if I come into this guy, the elevation in here of the surface is around 13.5 because I changed it from 10. So 13.5 is, so let's say I want to start at 13 at each one of these ends. Okay, so I'm going to briefly go through a little example of creating a feature line, some techniques there as well. So I'm going to go through create the feature line, and I'm going to call this one pond low flow. Okay. All right, so I have a new feature line, but if I hover over this, I don't know if you see this before, but you can look down here in the XYZ. If I hover over this, you can see here they're all 0 elevation. So I want to start at each end at say elevation 13, which is a ½ a foot lower than the bottom here. So elevation 13. And there's a myriad of ways I can do that, but I'll show you the quick elevation editor as one. If I just go here and click over here, I pick on this, which right now it's at elevation 0. It's now at elevation 13. Okay. Do the same thing over here. pick this one, elevation 13. So you might be able to see that in there, hopefully. Maybe go to a different view here. Okay. So you can see here, I hover over this one, it's elevation 13. Over here, it's at 0. All right. So if I want to create a low point somewhere along here, using mathematical terms here, let's say I want to go down at 0.5% to get to here, and then 0.5% to get this low point down here. Okay, there's some commands that'll do that for me. So if I click on that, there's a whole set of elevations that I can do. As far as edit elevations, there's set grade slope, there's insert high low point, that's what we're going to do. There's some other ones in there that are quite useful. Okay. So I'm going to go to the insert high low elevation point. I'm going to say start point would be here, end point would be this one. So you can see a little arrow that pops up where you want the grade or slope to be from that one. Again, I want that to be negative 0.5. And then what do you want the grade or slope to be from this one? Same thing, negative 0.5. It finds where that location is and places a low point there. Okay. And so what happens if I click on that and go to the elevation editor, I can actually see what it did. So there's negative half. It created this extra point in there for that low point. Okay. Of course, if I don't like that, there's ways to delete, add my own. I can still edit this all day long, but that's one way to do it. So again, the process here is we added grading objects, which automatically added itself to the surface. Okay. This guy here is not part of the surface yet. So this one we have to manually add. So again, those are automatically added because I checked the box. This one here I'm going to add now. So I'm going to click on this, and you'll see up in the ribbon there's a command here that says add a surfaces break line. I can also do the same thing if I right-click. Okay. Which surface do I want to add it to? I want to add it to my pond. Okay. And you can give it a name. It's going to be standard because it's 3 dimensions. I'm also going to add vertices along tangents and curves. Every 5 feet and every 0.1 around curves. Okay. So you see here, it automatically adds that to the surface now, and it's now linked. So that would be another way that I could fill in the bottom if I didn't want it to be flat. The infill would create a plane, and then obviously the feature line does it differently. So again, if I come through and make modifications to this, the surface will be changing as I do this. If I go and edit it, it's now linked together. So again, it's nice to have that instant feedback from the 3D as well at the same time. Okay. All right, so we've been designing with the graded relative elevation, distance, etc. Let's say I want the outside of the pond now to go to daylight to the surface. So we're going to do some 2 steps. First thing I'm going to show you how to daylight just with a certain number for cut and fill, and I'm going to show you how to do some transitioning. Okay? So for this thing around the outside of the pond, this time I'm going to grade the surface. Okay? And just to make sure here, when I grade the surface, you can see down at the bottom it gives me some clues of what I'm doing here, meaning what my current group is, which is pond, and then my current surface that I'm daylighting to would be EG, which is good. That's what I want to daylight to. All right, so this time I'm going to go to Create Grading. I don't know if you saw that, but I make a point here. I say between each one of these steps just in case, because being in 3D and doing some of these renderings does tend to make the machine a little slower and possibly crash. So we'll see what happens. So select Grading Side. This time I'm going to go to the outside. This time I'm going to say yes to entire length. We're going to do this in another step when I'm going to say no to that, but for now I'm going to say yes. And then in the cut format it's going to be slope. I'm going to be a 2-to-1 cut slope, but I'm going to change it to 4-to-1 for fill. 4-to-1 to fill. Okay. So now you'll see that it automatically figured that out for me. Didn't have to do much besides put in the numbers. So from that feature line, wherever it is, if I move that feature line in any way, this is the very first thing that I did is I made this feature line. If I move it, if I raise it, everything is linked to that one feature line. So everything will move, I guess, except for the pond low point. That will have to be moved with it. Okay. So just to show you, kind of look at, I'm going to move this a little bit. I'm going to take this, physically move it over here. That's going to be weird, like here. Did I just, I can't move, what did I grab there? Of course, I grabbed the wrong thing. I guess it does happen. Feature line, move. Am I grabbing the right thing in there? I guess you're going to have to trust me. I've done that before, but for some reason I'm grabbing the wrong one. All right, so 10 surface feature line. There's 2 feature lines, and I'm grabbing the one that's part of the grading object. Yeah, see how it's grayed out? Let me see. Okay, I'm going to win, for gosh sake. So there's in the back. All right, I'm grabbing the wrong one for some reason. Okay, in the interest of time, so my goal was there to show you that the feature line, if I would grab the right one, it wasn't letting me do it, so I have to figure that out. If I move that in any way, everything moves with it. Okay, I'm going to go through the process of showing you some transitioning. So I'm going to delete the grading here on the outside. Oh, that's why I was grabbing the wrong one. It's this one up here. That's okay. I was grabbing this one when I should have been grabbing this one. All right, I won, finally. So if I move that, ha! Okay, I feel better now. So you can see everything moved with it, right? Okay. But obviously some clashes are happening, so let me undo that. Okay. All right, I win. So delete grading. I'm going to delete this one, the daylighting around the outside. Okay. Now this time, let's say, for example, I'm close to the road over here, so let's say I want to do like a 2-to-1 slope over here. But over on this side, I want it to kind of maybe, if it overflows, there's some open space, maybe I want to go like, let's say 5-to-1. So I want to go 2-to-1 in this area, but 5-to-1 over here. And then how do I transition between these different slopes? I'm going to walk through that. All right, so same thing, grade the surface, create grading. And this time I'm going to grade from this one here. Which side? Here. Now you'll see applied entire length. This time I'm going to say no, because I'm going to do different areas. So I'm going to hit no. You'll see I get these little arrows. So let's say from there to there is going to be a 2-to-1. Okay. So the stations come up with is just the random numbers they have for that. So again, 2 and 2 for fill. 2 cut, 2 fill. So you see it just does that area. But then over here, I'm going to do the exact same command again, but make it 5-to-1 over here. Okay. Notice it automatically goes to the arrows because it's already been done once. So I'll say from here to there, I'm going to do a slope of 5, slope of 5. Okay. And of course, saving is always good. Now somewhere, this open space, I got to start at a 2-to-1, and then I have to transition into a 5-to-1. Instead of doing any math or calculation there, I can come over to this guy, and there's a create transition. Okay. So when I go to create transition, it's going to ask me to select a feature, which is with this guy here I'm going, and then it says select a location between the 2 gradings, or P for points. I can do it manually. All I can do is pick a point between the 2 gradings. It starts at a 2-to-1 and pulls it to a 5-to-1 in a nice transition feature there. Okay. Hit escape, so it finishes the surface building. I just got to do that one more time. And notice I'm saving between each one of these. Just pick a point between them and wait. Okay. And then, of course, save. So again, a couple of the points I want to make here is you can use a combination of gradings as well as feature lines to build the pond. You could use this all with feature lines and then manually add them to the surface. That would work as well. Okay, but in order to do the daylighting, the only way to do this daylighting is you must have a grading group. So there's a limitation there. You have to do that. In previous versions, they used to let you daylight to a polyline, but now they do not let you do that. It's got to be from these grading objects. Okay. Now we're going to do this design in steps. So I've built this pond. All right. Now I need to build a road down to the bottom of the pond. Okay. But I'm going to do this in 2 different sites. And the reason for that, later on, I'll go ahead and paste them together to create one contiguous surface. And that's typically the method that I would use. So let me walk through that now. So this time, I'm going to create a whole new site. I'm going to call this one Access Road Site. Okay. And in the access road side, I am also going to create a grading group, which I'm going to call access road. Now this time I am not going to use the automatic surface creation because I want to show you that feature. How do you create a surface without that? So when I've done that, you'll see here I have a grading group. Pond, that one's automatically linked to the pond. This one, access road, is not. So if I do not check the box, I have to come in and manually add a surface myself. So I'm going to create a new surface called access road. And 105 design. Okay. All right. So now what's going to happen is now I'm going to go ahead and design this thing. Let's say a 12-foot road, 12-foot wide road at a 2%. And I'm just going to make this up here. So let's say that's the daylight, huh? So let's say about right in here, that guy right there. That's where I'm going to start it. So you can see where it's lined up. That's the outside. This is just the daylight portion. Okay. So I'm going to draw from here. Let's say I'm going to make a nice little fancy thing. Okay. All I did there was draw a polyline from where I wanted to start on down here. Okay. And what I want that to be designed as is I want it to start at whatever elevation. I think this is elevation 23. It looks like it's 25. Did I put it at 25? I guess 25. Okay. Oh, I'm looking at here. I'm inside my cut. Hey, you guys weren't paying attention, huh? So I should be down there. Yep. Okay. So there's my road. Obviously, it's not tangent anymore, but bear with me. So what I'm going to do now is make sure that this feature line gets added to the correct site, because I do not want this added to my pond site. It will jack it up to no end, because those things will be crossing all those feature lines. It'll be bad. So let me get out of here. So I'm going to go to feature line, create from objects, which would be this one. Make sure this goes to the access road site. I'm going to call this one road high side. Okay. And okay. Now, since they're in separate sites, right, they don't react together. That's a big deal, right? So what I need to do is I need to have this be a constant grade all the way down to the bottom of the pond, wherever this happens to be. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is there's a nice command that I'll use. This is one with a little triangle to set grade slope between points. You know what? Before I do that, let's make sure that they're at the right elevation here. So that one here is at 25. And since I drew it as a polyline, this is also 25. This needs to be the surface elevation here. So I'm going to use this quick elevation editor. And when I come over here and pick on that, I can come down. One of the options is to select S for surface, so I can place it on the surface that I want. All right. And this current surface is ponds, which is what I want. It's calculated it to be 13.32. Okay. Just hit enter. So you see here, that one's at elevation 25. That's at elevation 25. That's at elevation 13. Obviously, that's not a constant grade. That's where this comes in. So I'm going to start here at elevation 25, which is right. I'm going to go all the way to the end. It automatically calculates what the constant grade would be, in this case, 8.41. So I'm going to accept that. So what's happening here is in the elevation editor, I specifically said make that 25, make that 13.32. I didn't want to calc that, so I used the function to see what the constant grade is. Now I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy it over to make the 12-foot at 2% road. So you can get rid of that. So I'm going to click on this one, and this time there's a command to do a stepped offset. Okay. So specify offset distance, I'm going to put in 12. Side to offset will be to the inside of the pond. And the elevation difference, grade, slope, etc. I'm going to say G for grade, and I'm going to say -2. So it's going to be -2 grade into the pond. And now I have kind of the structure of my road. Now, obviously, I didn't really tie it in very well in here. Okay, but for now, we're going to call it good. Now what I'm going to do is these two items need to be placed into a surface so I can actually get the contours. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this surface, I'm going to turn it off so we don't get confused on the contours we're looking at. So we just see the grading object, but these two guys are the road. So I'm going to grab both of those, and I'm going to add to surface as break line. So this is the same concept we did for the bottom of the pond, but now they're going to go to a different surface. I'm going to make this go to the access road. Okay. I'm going to call this one outline of road. And then I like to always use a 5 and the 0.1. That's kind of the default that I use. Now I have a surface. Okay. So obviously there's some issue here where I need to make the side slopes of the road now. And these things need to be tied into the pond surface, not the existing ground surface, but the pond surface. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take these and I'm going to daylight these on either side, but I'm going to daylight it to the pond. Okay? So I'm going to go back to my grading creation tools. Okay? And so this should be your clue here. The bottom, what's my current group, access road, and what surface am I daylighting to is empty. If I need to change these, if I actually wanted to go back to the pond site, I can change my site by that button right there, which my current site is. But access road is right. But I do need to change the surface, which would be this button here. And I need to make this daylight to the pond. So again, they're my current group, current surface I'm daylighting to. I'm going to do a grade to surface. Create grading. I'm going to pick this feature line from. Side to offset would be the outside there. Entire length, yes. I'm going to make this a 2-to-1 for both. Okay. And so in 3D, there's my side slope. Obviously, the end of that looks pretty poor. I would have to do some stuff to do there. But you'll notice here, I get the shading here. But what you might notice as well is that I don't have contours there. And that's because if you remember at the very beginning, for this site, I did not say, or sorry, the grading group, if you remember, I just said automatic surface creation was off. Just to review that a little bit. Oops, properties sweep over here. See, I didn't do the automatic surface creation. So it's not creating the surface. So the technique would be, is I would take this. This is actually a feature line. Right, this is the grading group. That's a feature line. I'm going to take this feature line and add it to the surface as a break line. So I have to manually add it to the access road. Same thing. This is going to be the bottom daylight, I'll call it. And now I have my surface. Obviously, that's key, because if you didn't have the surface, your volumes would be obviously slightly off. Okay. Now I got to do the exact same thing to the north side. So I'm going to create grading, pick the north one, pick the top, entire length, yes, a slope of 2, a slope of 2. Okay. And so you'll see in here, it's doing that. Okay. Looks like there's almost a little hole there. We'll see what happens when we add it to the surface. Okay. Oh, it just wasn't regenning right. It looks okay now. All right, so same thing. I'm going to take this feature line, add it to the surface as a break line. The access road, yes. Call it top daylight. I guess north would be better, but you get the idea. Okay. All right, now here's the drawback of not doing the automatic surface creation with the grading objects. You'll see here that that's supposed to be the outside, but I have a surface going outside of that, which means I have to clean up the surface manually or create a boundary. Okay. So I'm going to do this kind of quickly here. I'm going to just edit the style so I can see the triangles, so I can delete those triangles on the outside. Edit surface, delete line. All right, close enough. There's probably a little something in there, but it's good enough. So you see here I had to delete those things on the outside. So that's the drawback that I see when you don't automatic surface create. However, to be honest, I'd say a majority of the time I'm not doing automatic surface creation. On a site like this, I probably would because it's pretty small. But I started getting a little larger, and I noticed the automatic surface creation causes the computer some undue stress, it seems like. And so I have better luck when I don't automatic surface create. But a lot of times I'll try it first, and if it doesn't work, I'll have to go back and do it the other way. Okay. All right, so now I got the 2. Now, same thing here. If I wanted to, right, if I modify this, if I want to extend this up, right, to fill this gap, I can definitely do that. So obviously I don't know how a car is going to drive that, but you get the idea. All right, for some reason I want it to go right to here. So I can take this one, I'm going to go insert a PI, and I'm just going to eyeball it. Say I want it to go right to here. Okay. Oh, not letting me do that. Okay, fine. What did I miss? I missed something. Try that again. So insert a PI. Fine, be that way. So I think I can't insert the PI because it's outside of the realm. I was looking for my extend. Oh, you can just do extend. I forgot. So I'm going to extend this to here. Okay. And so you'll see in here, it updated. You see, since it's a daylighting object, it did do that as well. But I have a lot more to do. I would have to do the other one as well. Okay. But again, what I'm trying to show you there is that you can edit and update it after the fact. You don't have to redo the whole thing. And so you see here, I'm starting to get to the point where hopefully it doesn't crash. I'm just going to leave it because I do tend to do some stuff here. So what I'm going to do is come back to that. Okay. All right, so you get the idea. All right, so again, I do this in pieces. So one road surface and then the actual pond surface. So now what I'm going to show you is how to put these together. So first thing I'm going to do is turn this off. And it looks like it wants me to rebuild. Fine. So now to put these together in one complete surface, you'll see now, I'm going to go ahead and do some freezing here so you can see this in action as I do it. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a third surface with nothing in it. I'm going to call it pond with road. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is come into the definition of that surface and paste in the pond and then paste in the existing road, or sorry, the access road, to create the combination of the two. So I'm going to come into the definition and go to right-click on Edits. I'm going to paste a surface. I'm going to paste the pond first. So now I have an exact replica of the pond. Nothing's changed there. But then I'm going to go back and say paste another surface. But I'm going to paste the access road this time. And so it replaces what I have. Okay. Now I have some really weird contours at the end there because I didn't know what to do, how to tie that in. Because if you remember, I just cut it off right there, so I just kind of tied it in as best I could. But now I have a combination of the two surfaces. And the reason why this is now important is I'm creating these links. So if I go through and I edit the pond in any way, well, the pond, once that updates, so does that one. If I update the access road, same thing. They're all tied together, this pond with road. And now I have a combination of two surfaces. They're all linked together. Okay. And then finally, to tie this all together, going faster than I thought it would, but that's the way it goes, is creating volumes. Okay, so I'll do a couple of those. All right, so in the Analyze tab, there's a Volumes dashboard. I guess I should premise this by some of you guys are still using AutoCAD or Civil 3D 2012, which the Volumes dashboard is a feature probably not there at this point. This has been introduced into the subscription of 2012 if you have that installed, or 2013 and beyond, it's the Volumes dashboard. So it actually creates a surface a little bit different, but similar but different. So it creates this, in the panorama here, I actually have to create a volume surface that allows me to do a couple of reporting here and there. But so I'm create the volume surface. I'm going to call this one Pond Volumes. And I'm going to have it no display. I don't really want to see it. Choose your surface or your comparison surface. So my base surface would be existing ground. My comparison would be the pond with road. If you would like, you can account for cut and fill factors. These are the shrinkage and expansion factors of the geotechnical engineering report if you have one. Like, for example, if the dirt comes out of the ground and gets bigger, but what's that percentage? If it's 15% expansion, you could put in the 1.15. Okay. I typically recommend leaving them as the raw numbers and dealing with that later. The reason being is because actually the fill factor would also be larger than 1, which is counterintuitive. For example, on the fill factor, you put dirt in the ground, you have to compact it, that makes it smaller. Let's say it's 20%. So he's like, oh, okay, it makes it smaller, so you would think the fill factor would be 0.8. Unfortunately, it would be wrong. It wants to be bigger than 1, so you have to say 1.2. All right. Since that's so easy to mistake, I typically say deal with those numbers later. It's pretty easy to deal with. Okay. Okay. So it's actually creating a separate surface for that, and it tells you your overall cut and fill. And the adjusted aren't really adjusted because we set the fill factors to 1. Okay. But since the surface is now linked, if I change anything in any way, it would rebuild this. I have to rebuild the surface, but I get a new number right away. Okay. So a couple of benefits that we're going to show you here. I'm going to go back to one viewport. Okay. You can create a report, which is like an HTML report, but if you want to have something in the drawing, that's what this thing is. So insertion point, I'm just going to pick there. All it does is that. Now you probably wouldn't put that on a sheet or on your sheets, but at least it has something in the drawing, so you can kind of take a look if someone's done something. So it's nice to have it around if need be. All right, benefits to having a surface now. Let me kind of show you that. For example, on a pond, I don't know if I'd really do this, but there's a lot of times I've done jobs where you need mass grading, but then sometimes you have a phased kind of thing where you have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. They need to know the cut and fill for each phase. And you can do that with these volume surfaces. So for example, if I wanted to know what the cut and fill is just in that area, not the whole surface, but just this area, I have a closed object. This is just a polyline. Okay. With this, I can do that. So if in here in the panorama here, if I right-click on pond volumes, oh, not right-click, sorry. Is it in there? It's not. Okay, it's up here. Once I highlight that, you'll see this little button here. This is add bounded volume. It's a fancy term for just give me the volume inside of an area. Okay, so if I hit add bounded volume, you can see at the command line it says select bounding object. I'm going to pick the polyline that I just drew. Okay, and what happens is underneath this, it'll now show you that one object that you just did and show you the cut and fill just inside that area. Okay, so that way you can do kind of the overall grading as well as the cut and fill inside of that. So again, if I change that, you notice the numbers are changing. So it's nice. It's linked to that object now. So you can get pretty crazy if you need to. Okay. So that's a benefit of having a surface. You can do the bounded volumes as they're called. And just for giggles here, I'm going to get rid of that. The other thing that I do like having a surface for, a volume surface, is I can actually do a cut fill diagram. Let me kind of explain what I'm talking about here. So if you look in the prospector, I have this pond volumes. I'm going to right-click on pond volumes and go to surface properties, because you can actually analyze this surface. You can analyze it a number of ways, but I'm going to do in elevations. And the reason for that is anything that's a negative number is considered to be cut. Anything that's a positive number would be fill, so I can see where my cut and fills are. So I'm going to do an elevation analysis, but only 2 ranges. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and hit the little arrow to run the analysis. I'm going to change the color scheme. Red for cut, green for fill. Hopefully nobody's colorblind. That might be kind of rough. But I'm going to change it so any negative number is red, any positive number is fill. I will have to come in right now, my surfaces style, set the no display. There is a style called elevation banding 2D, which will do exactly what I want, show me the elevations. Hit OK. So now I can see on here where my cut and fills are. Obviously, it's a pond, obviously, so we know where the cuts are. But on another type of surface, if you do that, you can really see where your cut and fills are. So if you're trying to balance, you can say, oh, this area over here is a lot of cut. Well, if I move this up a little bit, I'll get less cut, so I can make some decisions, basically, with this. Okay. All right. And so I got about that. All right, so we'll show you that one last thing, and then we'll move on to the STB and CTB. So other things that people like to see in the cut-fill diagram is I also like to label this as well. So I'm going to show you a little feature that I do also. I'm going to go ahead and add surface labels, but spot elevations along a grid, so I can actually see what the cut and fill numbers are. Okay. So spot elevations on a grid. It's going to ask me to select a surface. I'm going to hit Enter, because I'm going to label the pond volume surface. Okay. Specify grid base point. I just want to make sure I get the whole thing. So I'm going to pick over here. Grid rotation of 0. spacing, I'm going to do 20. I don't want to do 5. It's too many labels. 20 and 20. So I'm going to come up to here and make sure I get the whole site. That looks good up there, so I'll pick. Oh, I guess I did a pretty poor job there. Oh, well, good enough. Do I want to change it? I'm just going to say no. Okay. So you see here, I put the label basically where every one of those were, so I can see exactly where the cuts and the numbers are, so I can get that as well. So that's what you're getting benefit of having the pond volume surface. You can do the cut fill diagram, so you can see colors, and then you can also get numbers by labeling it along a grid. Okay. And that was, again, that was here, surface spot elevations, but on a grid. Okay. So that's some usefulness for dealing with grading. So again, to recap, it's extremely important to do site management when you're dealing with grading, especially with feature lines, right? The feature lines are in the same site, they will react together. All right, so you can see here, very important that I put the pond site for the pond grading group and the access road site for the other one so they didn't react together, and so I can paste them together later. Okay. In the pond grading group, we did have automatic surface creation on, so it automatically did that as we built it. It put the contours and everything in there for you. That's probably the preferred method if it worked all the time. But like I was saying, there are times in a larger, it typically happens in a larger site, I usually have problems where the automatic surface creation happens. So then if it does start crashing and becomes unusable, which I'd say maybe, I don't know, quarter of the time, which is more than it should be, but it does happen, then I would have to uncheck that and add the feature lines manually to the surface like we did with the access road. Again, the benefit you get with this one, with the automatic surface creation, is you don't have to delete lines around the outside. It does the boundary for you. But we had to actually delete some lines around the outside because it doesn't do the boundary. But it wasn't a huge amount of work, but you get the idea. Okay. All right. No display. It's getting a little busy in here. Select similar. Delete those. Okay. All right. So to finish off today, we're going to have some requests for dealing with CTB versus STB. Why would you use one versus the other? And that typically came up from because I guess Caltrans is using STB, so people need to know how to deal with that. Okay. So the last 5-10 minutes we'll talk about that. All right. So this drawing, the way you can tell if a drawing is in a CTB or an STB format is by the layer dialog box. A drawing can only be either or, it can't be both. So if I type in layer, the way that you could tell is this column right here, plot style. And see how it's grayed out? If it's grayed out and you can't double click to actually edit it, that means this is a color dependent. So when you go to plot, if I type in plot, and all it will show you will be CTB files. Okay. So if I want to use an STB, or how do I go back and forth? Okay. That's kind of what we're going to talk about here briefly, and then I'll show you how the setup works. So with the color table, CTB file format, it's based on color. A certain color plots a certain thickness. In the style or the STB file format, instead of the color is independent of plotting, so you can make colors anything you want. It plots by this column over here, the plot style. Okay, that's really the only difference. Personally, in my opinion, I believe plot style is a little easier to deal with, because the biggest thing that I see is you X-reference a drawing in and you want to grayscale it, like a contour map, let's say. What typically happens is somebody goes through and grabs the X-reference and does something like this, right? Grab the whole X-reference and they make it all color 8 or whatever, right? So that now it's grayed back, et cetera, because they knew color 8 is a grayscale based on their CTB. I see that all the time. Okay. However, it doesn't give the drawing distinction, right? Now it's just gray. You don't get that same feel anymore. So instead of having to deal with colors all the time, make the colors whatever you want. Instead of doing that, you grab this, you come over to here and say, make it 50% screening. The colors don't change, so the look doesn't feel different. So it's a little bit different paradigm shift, but I find it a lot easier to change things to make it either a color plot or a black and white plot or a grayscale plot without having to worry about color so much. To me, it's a little more intuitive. That's just me, though. Okay? So back to it. If I want to change between STB versus CTB, I put that up here just briefly here. There's 2 commands that you'll need to know. I'm going to put this on there. It's being recorded, so if you don't write those down now, they will be you will have those. But it's convert P styles and then convert CTB. Okay, I'll explain why you need both. Okay, so if I need to go to an STB, so I'm going to go to, if I type in convert P styles, this is the command. Oh, if I could type convert P styles, hit return. So it tells you this command converts color dependent to a name plot. It's going to change. This is going to change if I'm already in STB. If I'm in an STB and I want to go to a CTB, it'll be a different dialog box. But in order to do that, I have to grab a plot cell that has been converted. Okay. So when you're going from a CTB to an STB, it's actually a two-step process. Okay. Let me explain why. So first thing I need to do is a convert CTB. I'm going to convert a CTB file into an STB file so I can convert this drawing. So I happen to have one that we call CMI standards full. That's the one we usually use. It's going to convert this CTB file to an STB. So I'm going to grab that one, hit open. It's going to make a new file that I'm going to call I want to convert already. Okay. So it's going to create a new file. I have to use this file to now convert it. So I'm going to hit save. All right, it's now been successfully created. So step one is to say convert CTB. Now I can use the convert P styles. And it's going to say the same thing that it was before, hit OK. And I'm going to grab, I want to convert already, that's the one I just made. And I'm going to hit open. Okay. Not sure why it's grading, but fine. So now it says drawing converted from color dependent to name style mode. So what happens now is when I go to my layer dialog box, I now have this column here. If I double click on it, you'll see here now I select the plot style. But I don't want to use the I want to convert already. I want to use the standard one that I use. So if I go to, I have one that we call CMI standard STB. And you can see how we have black, screened. These ones that are missing are just from the drawing. So let's say I want to make this black. Okay. For some reason, I'm not sure why, I have to get out of the drawing and come back in for this to update. So I will do that just to prove to you. So I'm going to close the pond. Go back and open up the pond. Go to my layers, and now you see it's not grayed out anymore, right? So what I could do is say, grab all these, and I'm going to go ahead and plot style black. Okay. So again, how you plot determines, based on this column now, the plot style column versus the color column. And again, the reason why I find it a little bit more useful is I can change it a lot easier. I know it's plotting black. Easy. Well, now I want to plot color. Well, I change it to one that has a color mode. Okay. Or I want these to be screened now. So instead of color, I'll have it 50% screened. So I can change it over here. This is exactly how it plots versus having to change the color. That's really the only difference. But instead of having to deal with 255 colors, I'm dealing with a lot less properties. Right? Screenings, colors, and blacks. Okay? That's kind of the story. So now we're going to kind of go behind the scenes and show you what it looks like between a CTB versus an STB. Okay? So again, I guess before I do that, remember those commands: convert P styles, convert CTB. So just to make sure, now when I plot here, notice it's only asking for STB because it's that file format now. So what I'm going to do, let's go to options. Plot and publish, plot style. So I'm going to look at some of these plot styles. Okay. All right, so normal thing here, there's that CAD standard, CMI standards full that we use here at CAD Masters a lot. And the way that it looks in the form view, right, you have, these are all the AutoCAD colors. So if I pick on color 1, it's going to plot black using this line weight, et cetera, that's screening. So if I go to color 8 or whatever, this happens to be a screening 40. So with CTB, you're just messing with 255 colors. With an STB, let me go to one that's in there. We have a CMI as well, CMI STB. So with this one, this is the ones you saw before, right? Black says it's going to plot black, but use object line weight, or 75% screen, 60% screen, et cetera. This way you don't have to train new people, et cetera, to say, you know, the 50% screen is color 74, that kind of thing. You don't have to have that table. These just make more sense. Or if you want to plot color, you see how it says use object color. So it's the same thing. Instead of having to deal with 255 of them, you deal with only the ones you want. Now, you'll see here, if you want to plot it black, it says use object line weight. I need to point out to you, if it's set this way, it's not going to use down here, use object line weight. If it's set to use object line weight, let me get out of this. That means when I set it to black, right, there's a line weight here where it says default, which means nothing, but then you would have to also set this. We have our own software that sets these all automatically for us. So I would recommend, if you guys are going to do that, to have the styles actually set to actual thickness. And so let me explain that. I have another example that I can show you. There's a couple of companies that use it, so we have one that's this one. So you can see the way that they set it up is they have the name styles are actually the thicknesses they want to plot. So you can see here they have a 0.5. So now you know exactly what it's going to plot based on the name. Or you can also see screening with the thicknesses. That's how they name them. Okay. So I find this easier to deal with this many styles because most of the time most companies don't plot more than maybe 5 to 6 line weights and a couple different screenings, okay? And then maybe color. So you don't have to deal with so much styles. You just have one style. That's basically what's happening. And so again, the drawing can only be either or, and the way you tell is by the layer dialog box, and you can change it. So right now it's set to this. If I want to change it back to a CTB, convert P styles. Look at that, I still can't spell. Convert P styles. Now this one, I don't have to do anything to it. I don't have to pick anything. So going from an STB to a CTB, it's a one-stepper. Going from a CTB to an STB is 2 steps. So now if I go to my layer dialog box, okay, even though it's highlighted, I can't double-click on it to do it. I have to get out and come back in, and then it grays out. But now it's now color-dependent. So just to prove, so I set it back to a CTB. So I'm just closing and opening it. My layer dialog box, okay, and then see it's grayed out. I can't do anything. So that's the way you tell which if the drawing is set to a CTB or an STB. I guess the other one would be if you went to the plot and it would only show you the CTB or STB. That's another way to tell as well. Okay, but there is ways to convert between the two, and there is ways to set them both. So again, converting company-wide to from a CTB to an STB could be a little undertaking with but I do believe it's where we're headed, but I don't know if we want to rock the boat quite so hard yet to deal with that. But that's what's happening. So Caltrans uses the STB file format. A lot of other companies do. So that's kind of the long skinny of it. Okay. So to kind of recap today, we spent the morning with the first half with grading, dealing with site management, and dealing with grading groups. So different sites, different grading groups, and feature line creation a little bit, and how to paste surfaces together. And then at the end today, we also talked about CTB versus STB and how to convert between the two, and why you might want to use one versus another. Okay. Notice that I was monitoring the questions today. Not a whole lot of them. In fact, none. So I'll stick on the line here for the next couple of minutes if you have some questions. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. So same thing. If you have some other options that you guys want to talk about, please get that to Mark Dickinson so I can include them in the class.